Hi, my name is Sean Mabry. I'm a writer, and today I wanted to talk about a book that I read and really enjoyed recently, which is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Now, if you are deep in the world of fantasy and sci-fi, you may have heard of this book already. It's a Hugo Award winner and the first of a trilogy of novels called the Broken Earth Trilogy. And this is not going to be a formal review because I don't really do those, for books at least. The review portion of this video will be go buy it and read it. It's fantastic. It's one of the best written books I've read in years. Alright, there's your review. What I really wanted to talk about here though is a writing lesson that you can pick out from this book, which I think is worth talking about because it's not immediately obvious. And what I mean by that is that, especially in the genres of fantasy and sci-fi, I see a lot of novice writers begin with this suspicion, this inkling that because we are writing in fiction and a very abstract corner of fiction, we don't necessarily have to study the real world. We can just make stuff up. We can just sort of conjure things from whole cloth. And, yes, to an extent, yes, you can do that. And in fact, there are certainly authors that basically do just that and produce some really wonderful work. However, I want to talk about this book in particular because, and again, I'm talking about The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. In this book, you really can see a great example of an author writing fantasy, but using her study of real-world science in many different ways, and I'll get to that in a second, but she's using her study of real-world science to build an incredibly believable world and an incredibly believable magic system. So to give you a little bit of a taste of what's going on in the book, there is a particular system of magic called orogeny, which is a born-in trait that a certain tiny percentage of the population has. They either try to keep it secret or they are discovered and basically, pressed into a sort of indentured servitude by the government. But what orogeny is that it's the ability to control tectonic activity. They can reach down into the earth and manipulate vast stores of energy to create all kinds of wild effects. And one of the really interesting parts of this from a scientific perspective is that she actually took into account the fact that heat is energy. When something is hot, that means it contains a lot of energy. When it's cold, that means it contains far less energy. So as these orogenes, as they're called, are moving around tectonic plates and causing these rifts in the earth or causing spikes of rock to pop up, they develop a torus around them of extremely cold air because they're literally moving the heat, the energy, from themselves out into these other places. So cause and effect, there has to be a colder zone around them. And there's so many different clever ways that she because this is rooted in it's a magical system, but it's rooted in real science. She's able to establish how the system works very clearly, very early in the book, so that it's believable. But then once she's kind of established the rules, she's able to pull these incredibly creative, inventive, surprising moves with the magic. And half the fun of the book is just seeing how elegantly she sort of uses this tool that she's invented. But the other aspect of the book that I find really fascinating, and I think comes from her study of science, which I'll get to also in a second, is that the way the scientists in the book, the way that the academic culture in the book behaves, again, feels very real. The way that these characters are studying the fictional world that they live in feels very much like the way real academics in our world study our world. And that's something that texture, that sophistication is something you just couldn't really get if you didn't have a deep reading of nonfiction, in this case, scientific literature. And there's so many different things I could point out that I love in this book, but those are kind of two of the big broad categories. And as I was reading it, I had this inkling that I was like, you know what? I think N.K. Jemisin reads a lot of nonfiction. I feel like she probably reads actual articles on tectonic activity to figure out how this stuff works, and I feel like she maybe has been in an academic environment for a while. And sure enough, when I got to her afterwards, she explained that this book started as a project inspired by a NASA study group that she was part of. Literally, NASA got a bunch of speculative fiction writers, fantasy, sci-fi, together and basically said, here, have a bunch of science, work this into your fiction somehow. We just want to get the public more interested in science, more passionate about science. And she took that and wrote this incredibly inventive fantasy book out of it, which won a Hugo Award. So I'm not the only one who thinks so. And really, all of this is to really drive home the point that if you, like me, write in sci-fi, fantasy, I'll even throw in genres like horror, anything supernatural. If you write modern fairy tales or something like that, any of these things that we consider kind of more abstract, capital F fiction genres, read nonfiction too. Like, read deep, big, heavy, tough scientific books and articles, and just read these things that are beyond just fiction, because it'll make your fiction better. It'll make it more believable. I mean, even if you want to do something that's just completely abstract and out there, this will still give you the grounding to do that even more effectively. And I don't know, maybe one day you'll win a Hugo Award. No guarantees, but hey, wouldn't that be nice? Certainly I'd like to do that someday. So maybe we'll do that after reading some science books and putting that in our fiction. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I will be back next week.